Hey everyone, this is Steve from GamersNexus.net, and today we're overclocking a GTX 980. This is a how-to tutorial on how to overclock Maxwell, specifically looking at the GTX 980. Maxwell has changed the game quite a bit for overclocking versus Kepler, but still pretty easy stuff. We can walk through it pretty quickly and have you going in no time. So I have written a full guide on this that is very detailed. If I skip steps in here, check the link in the description below for the guide, and that covers everything you could possibly want to know about overclocking Maxwell. Let's get to it with the video component here. First of all, you need a few tools for this. You will need EVGA Precision, which I have open on the screen here. You'll need GPU-Z, also open. And you're obviously going to need the newest version of the NVIDIA drivers, potentially with GFE if you want GFE. I would recommend it at this point. Beyond those tools, I would recommend also setting up some kind of spreadsheet like this one that you see on my screen. This is what I use for keeping track of my overclocks, how they perform, and if they're stable or not. And this allows me to go back in time later if I want to roll back my changes, if I want to find a more moderate overclock that's not quite as extreme, which is something I would recommend doing after you find the maximum overclock possible for endurance reasons on the semiconductor. So here's how overclocking works with Maxwell. First of all, you'll notice in precision, this is what we are using to do the overclocking. We are increasing the frequency of the base and boost clock, and we will increase the memory clock a little bit as well, though that's something I focus on less, as it is a bit easier to do. And Maxwell introduces power target percentage, which is what you see here at the top. So this is how much power we are willing to supply the GPU over its stock. 100% would be about 180 watts max TDP. Now this is something that NVIDIA originally advertised to the media, that max TDP was about 165 watts for the GTX 980. However, if we look at Kepler BIOS Tweaker, I have opened the BIOS for the GTX 980 that I have, the reference card. This is a guide, by the way, for the reference card. Your mileage will vary for other cards. And in opening the BIOS, we can see that at 125% TDP, we're hitting about 225 watts. Now, at 100%, we're at 180 watts. So 180 watts, 125% of that, or 1.25 times 180, is 225. So that means the board, the PCB, the VRM, and the GM204 chip itself can handle a maximum of 225 watts. That's pretty good, but certainly nowhere near what some of the aftermarket cards will allow you to do. So looking at the power target here, we're going to increase that once we start hitting walls, once the overclock becomes unstable. We also have the GPU temperature target. I leave this untouched for overclocking. That's just how hot maximally you want the GPU to get. We have the GPU clock offset, which is what we will focus the most on. This plays with the base clock, boost clock. And then we have the memory clock offset, which is just overclocking the memory. We'll do that in a bit. Over here on the right side, we have the voltage, which we increase for stability. So in the guide, I talk about the concepts of overclocking. We'll cover them very briefly here. In overclocking, what you're trying to do is increase the frequency of the semiconductor, of the chip, in this case the GPU, the GM204 GPU. We're trying to increase that boost clock. And we can increase it to an extent without having to touch voltage. It will remain stable up to, depending on your card, depending on your chip, because all chips are made differently. It could be 150 megahertz, could be 170 megahertz, it might be 200 megahertz before it starts exhibiting instability. And that's very easy to do. Once it does exhibit instability, which is normally shown in the way of blue flickers, driver crashes, screen flickering, or texture tearing, things like this, once you see those instabilities, you'll need to either step back the clock to regain stability or increase the voltage to supply more voltage to the GPU so that it can sustain that higher clock rate without these issues. And you only can go up to 1.256 volts on Maxwell on the GM204 980 chip. So we do have a limit there of how high we can go before needing an aftermarket card of some sort. And do keep in mind that higher voltage means higher temperature, which also threatens stability and definitely threatens the longevity of the card. So a few disclaimers. Overclocking can cause permanent irreversible damage to your components if you do it irresponsibly, or if you're trying for an extreme overclock. Overclocking at a moderate rate will not cause serious damage. You can definitely get a moderate overclock out of almost any component, and the life of the system will be expired before that component dies due to your overclocking. Overclocking may also void warranties, so do keep that in mind, and they can check. So, tools. GPU-Z we will be using for monitoring the boost clock to make sure that overclock is actually applied, because your software may tell you it's applying, but Boost 2.0 on Maxwell and Kepler will throttle back the clock once it feels like there's not enough power available or there's stability issues, so it will throttle back. We need GPU-Z to tell us specifically what our clock is sitting at. We also need it to tell us the temperatures and things like that. EVGA Precision we're using for the overclocking. Kepler BIOS Tweaker you do not need. That's just to look at your BIOS if you want to see sort of the boost tables, the power tables, stuff like that. This spreadsheet, I would recommend creating one exactly with these headers and just keep track of everything for ease in the future, but not necessary, certainly. And then finally, you'll need 3D Mark Firestrike, which is a GPU benchmarking tool. This is not it's not something that will load your GPU 100% all the time. Firestrike Extreme will, for the most part, but we can't use FurMark because the boost clock has issues being triggered properly in FurMark. So we're using 3D Mark Firestrike, and there are other burn-in tools if you want to do a full burn-in test. Let's get started. For overclocking first, what we're going to do is look at our base settings. And we are currently sitting at 1126 megahertz for the GPU clock, and the boost clock is the red mark here, so that's a little over 1200. I believe it's 1216 from memory, and that's not quite good enough for me. I want some more power than that, so we're going to increase this. It's very important that you do this incrementally. I know very well what this specific GPU I have in the system will do, but I have other GTX 980s that are different, and they're all different. So do this incrementally. That said, we know as a general rule of thumb that you can increase the clock at least 100 megahertz, generally 150, 170 megahertz before you have any issues whatsoever, other than perhaps changing the power target. So we can just jump ahead to one of those numbers, and then after that point we'll increase probably about 10, 15 megahertz at a time. Eventually you hit a wall, you start doing 1 to 5 megahertz increases. So I'm going to type in 150 right here. We're doing a 150 megahertz increase. For now, I'm just going to increase the power to 110%. I want to note, running the power target at max at 125% for extended periods of time can threaten the longevity of the GPU. Only run it like that if you're doing benchmarking, then throttle it back once you find your max number, unless you're just benchmarking. So here's what we're doing for now. We're going to apply this. Actually, you know what? Let's increase. No, we'll leave the memory clock alone for now. We'll apply this. We have 0 millivolts overvoltage, and once we've applied this, you go to the sensors on GPU-Z, tell it to log to file, and we're going to give it a name. I like to title these my settings, so 150 overclock, we'll call it, and save. So now it is logging to that file every second. What we do next is open 3D Mark, and this will, I've got 3D Mark Pro or Advanced or whatever it's called, and we're just going to run, I normally run Extreme. You won't have this if you have the free version, so we'll turn that off. Don't need the demo, so we run it. When this runs, it will burn in the GPU slightly. It'll basically benchmark for frame rate and stability. It's a couple minute long test. I'm not going to show all of it here, but basically all you're looking for is stability. You don't want to walk away from this test because it might not tell you about some instabilities like texture tearing. So while you're watching this benchmark, keep an eye out for things like blue flickering, texture tearing, black flickering, stutters, anything like that. And you're going to let this run. Normally you'll notice instability in the first set of tests. There are 3 sets, but sometimes I don't see it till the second one. So I already know that this is stable because I've already done this. I'm going to cancel out of this. You should let it run in full. When you let it run in full, it'll give you a report with your score, which is a made-up number calculated by Firestrike, and FPS and things like that. Log it in your document. And also log if the overclock was stable or not. Now, this is only a couple minute test, so we don't know for sure if it's going to be stable in the long term. But once you start finding that threshold of stability and instability, we'll do a longer 4-hour burn-in test overnight or something like that. So we know this is good. Let's open up our document that we just created with GPU-Z, and I know that was 150-OC. You can see I've done this quite a bit here. So here it is. This is what it looks like. You can load this into Excel or Calc or something like that if you would like to, but this is fine for me. In the first column, we have the clock. Scroll through here, look for the maximum number. Boost 2.0 means that it's not going to run at the number all the time. You can force it to run at the number all the time, but it's not great for the GPU and will be worse on stability because it won't be able to throttle back when it wants to recover an unstable clock. So here we have 1409.6. Now you'll notice that is actually lower than what precision tells us we have. I don't know why that's not showing up. That should say 150, as you know. So if we click here, we'll see down below that at our 150 number, we should be in the range of 1278 megahertz for the GPU clock, which means boost will be slightly above that. 1409 is actually going to be above what our advertised boost is, but that's okay because that's how boost works. So we know this is stable. Now we can increase more. We'll go back to precision. And at this point, we're just going to look for an unstable number without touching voltage. And I want to do it within reason so that we can throttle back. So let's jump up to 200 megahertz. I'm going to go ahead and increase the memory clock at this point, 200 megahertz as well. We're leaving power target at 110%. And now when I test 3D Mark, just to trigger instability, I'm running it with extreme. We are going to see if this is unstable or not. So a new file, 200-OC, run 3D Mark, and this will run. If it's not stable, it'll crash, it'll do flickering, anything like that, and then we need to start playing with voltage or throttle back the clock. Overclocking Maxwell is very easy. You basically just change your power percent target number, and you change the clocks as necessary, and then you increase voltage in small steps, normally about 6 millivolts at a time, to sustain stability of the GPU. And in doing so, you'll eventually hit a wall because Maxwell only has so much power to provide, in this case 225 watts max, to the clock and to the voltage. So between those two things, you've got to really push the clock as high as possible before messing with the voltage, because increasing voltage will eat into our power allowance or power budget, which we want to reserve for the actual clock rate, because that's what we're trying to increase. So you need to do all this incrementally, keep voltage as low as possible, generally 6 to 12 millivolts at a time. If you know that it's very unstable, you could probably push 12, and then rerun the tests, see if it crashes or not. This looks like it's actually stable so far, but we'll see if that holds out. Okay, so I cut ahead. What you just saw was a red flash and then a black flash. I consider that unstable. That is not okay, in my opinion, because that means that the GPU is starting to lose its ability to perform stably, and it's eventually going to crash or cause other problems. So we saw some flashing. That means it's time to start playing with other numbers here. This precision version seems to... I think it's an issue with recording where we're seeing some of this text disappear. So at 200 megahertz, we're having issues. Now in my log file, I logged that I was able to do a 230 megahertz overclock with a power of 23% and overvoltage of 12. You will need to step up incrementally to get these numbers and figure it out. So if I increase it 6, it might sustain the voltage. Maybe we can increase this a little bit, but we'll leave it at 110 for now. Hit apply, because you only want to change one thing at a time, and then re-benchmark it. I already know what's going to happen for this. It will be a bit better, it'll be more stable, but still have some instability on occasion. So at this point, what I would do is increase the power percent to 115, and hit apply, and then consider increasing the voltage depending on the results of this. Now, once you start hitting this state, it's good to increase these numbers a small bit at a time. So I'll increase this to 230. I know that I had my memory at 211. We can really, that was just kind of a random number. We can do 225. And then we'll test this number. You'll test it. And maybe it's stable. If it's stable, great. Push it another 10 megahertz, 15 megahertz. Once you find instability, increase the voltage a little bit. If it's still unstable, increase the power target a little bit, and then voltage a tiny bit more. You probably don't want to go too high in the voltage, and remember you only have 1.256. We can see here I'm getting instability, red flashes immediately. I'm going to cancel this test. I already know it's not going to work, and increase the voltage in this case. So I'm going to go back over to precision, increase the voltage, plus 12, hit apply, we'll test it again. And at this point, if it's not stable, we can play more with the voltage, more with the power target. At some point in your overclocking process, you will hit a stage where it is no longer possible to just increase voltage or power in order to sustain that overclock. That is your wall. That's as high as you're going to go. This is the point where you want to throttle back a tiny bit to a point where it is stable, benchmark it, log your numbers, and then go back to a moderate overclock. We can see here I'm still getting red flashes. So at this point, what I would probably do is increase the power percent, 125, just to make sure there's enough power for the clock and for the over voltage that I am currently applying. And then we'll increase the voltage to plus 18. We should probably stop there and test because we've already changed enough at this point. Each time you change something, you're going to want to start GPU-Z again and log the file, log the temperatures. You can average them if you want. I have a guide on that. And just make sure you know what you're looking at. I'm being a bit quick here because it's a tutorial. So you can see I'm still unstable. We're running into issues where we need to figure out what the problem is. And in this case, it's probably a mix of the clocks being high and the voltage not being high enough. So we just keep increasing. Eventually we find a stable rate. And I have all of those logged here because I've done this. So my highest stable overclock was really 285, which produced a 1537.7 boost clock logged through GPU-Z with a memory overclock of 300, 25% power, 18 millivolts over voltage, and it's not logged here, but I forced the fan speed at 75% to make sure it was cooling properly, which is probably part of our issue here today. So you just need to incrementally step up. You'll eventually find a comfortable overclock, and all that's detailed in my guide. Please let me know if you have any questions whatsoever. That is how to overclock Maxwell. Just do small steps, and once you find a moderate number, in my instance here, 295 was my max, 285 was my most stable max. I would probably throttle back to 250 or 230, potentially even less, maybe 200, maybe 180, and leave it at about 180 megahertz in my case for my GPU, with power at 115%, and that will preserve your GPU's endurance without really losing too much performance. So do be careful with this. It is possible to cause damage to your GPU. Let me know if you have any questions whatsoever, and I will see you all next time. Peace.